Hi everyone, this week's Parsha is Parshas Terumah. So we've talked about Matan Torah, we've talked about Chet Egel, and now we're focusing on the building of the Mishkan, which is going to be Hashem's mobile home in the desert where Bnei Yisrael is going to come to serve him until the Beis HaMikdash can be built. And the Torah spends a lot of time and goes into almost excruciating detail on everything surrounding the Mishkan. The makeup, the building of it, the materials used, how the service was structured, what happened in each area. We can really draw pretty accurate physical diagrams of how it looked and how all of the objects used therein looked, and also sort of the daily service. We know exactly what was happening. So why does it go into such detail? It spends 13 chapters talking about the Mishkan, where by contrast, it spends one chapter talking about the creation of the universe. So why is this such a heavy focus? And another question that arises is, why does Sefer Shemos end with this topic? We have another few parshios to go until the end of Sefer Shemos, and from now until the end, it just talks about the Mishkan. It sounds like it would have been kind of nice to sort of end off on Matan Torah, which is such a climactic point, and then maybe to group the Mishkan in Sefer Vayikra, which comes next, and is already talking about the Mishkan and different laws and going into sort of more mundane details about things that occurred. So why is it grouped in this way? Why does the whole Sefer Shemos end off on this topic? So there are many commentaries that understand the Mishkan and sort of its purpose and what it means through a lot of different interesting parallels, and it's almost a microcosm of a lot of larger things that we can learn from. So the first one is the parallel between the Mishkan and the physical body of man himself. So the vessels in the Mishkan are likened to the organs and the different faculties that man has. The ark with the Torah inside is likened to our mind, our intellect, and our speech. The menorah is compared to our sense of sight. The shulchan with the lechem mishnah, the bread, is compared to our sense of taste and feel. The mizbeach with the ketoras, or the incense, is likened to our taste of smell. And the outer mizbeach, where the animal sacrifice occurred, is likened to our digestive tract. So it really highlights how we ourselves become, or are supposed to become, a vessel to serve God, and to serve God with our entire bodies, our entire beings, even our organs and the things that we're not consciously aware of every day. The second parallel that's drawn between the Mishkan is talks about the physical service that occurred in the different locations of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was comprised of the outer courtyard, an inner courtyard, and then the innermost sanctum, which was the Holy of Holies. So in the outermost courtyard, this was sort of the most unrefined, almost mundane, sort of dirty work. This is where the animal sacrifice took place, sort of the blood and the gore and the things that happened every day. And this is sort of compared to the purely mundane things that exist in the world, purely physical. The inner courtyard, that's where the more refined, holy work happens, sort of the elevated work, lighting the menorah. And this is like the things that we do. This is how we elevate the mundane into something a little bit more spiritual and holy. Of course, in the Holy of Holies, this was the purely spiritual work. And this only happened once in a while. This was not a daily occurrence. Of course, the Kohen Gadol only entered on Yom Kippur. And this represents sort of the utter transcendence of the material world and that trajectory upwards. The Rambam also says that the Mishkan correlates to the different spiritual strata of the universe. The Mishkan, like we said, is made up of the outer courtyard, which represents purely terrestrial creatures, purely physical things that exist in the universe. The inner courtyard is refined physical entities like the stars and the heavenly bodies. And the Holy of Holies is, like we said, purely spiritual matters, like angels. They have no physical matter to them. They are only spiritual beings. And this also relates to Shabbos, weekday, and Yom Kippur. The weekday is purely mundane, purely physical. Shabbos is the elevated physical. And of course, Yom Kippur, which only happens once a year, is the utter transcendence of anything material. So there's an interesting disagreement between the Rambam and Ramban about what is the most core component or the most essential function of the Mishkan. The Rambam says that the Mishkan is a house for God that is designed for the offering of sacrifices. So he references the animal sacrifices, which is talking about the outer courtyard. And his idea is that we give sacrifices to God, and that is the essential core function of the Mishkan, is for us in the outermost courtyard to express our love to God, to communicate with God. Ramban has almost the opposite approach. He says the main object of the sanctuary is to serve as the resting place for the divine presence. This is realized in the ark, as in the Holy of Holies, as God says to Moshe, I will commune with you there, speaking to you from above the ark's cover. So in his opinion, the core part, the essential function of the Mishkan occurs in the innermost sanctum, the Holy of Holies, where God communicates with us. So it's sort of a two-way street and differing opinions. And of course, both are true. The Mishkan is the physical location And the physical point of interface between man and God, where we can communicate back and forth with God. It's a two-way street, and that's where the relationship occurred. But what do we make of this today? Because of course we don't have a Mishkan and we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. And there's a famous Seforno that says that before the Chet Egel occurred, the original kind of blueprint, the original plan was not necessarily for a Mishkan to exist, but for each family in Bnei Yisrael to sort of have a Mishkan within their home. Their homes were to become individual homes for Hashem, and that's where they would commune with God and create that relationship and foster that relationship and do that back and forth communicating. And of course, in the Jewish home, that's what we have today. We don't have a Mishkan, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, but the homes that we set up, anything from the physical setup of the home, we know that our Shabbos tables are compared to the Shulchan in the Mishkan, the physical setup of the home, the service that we do therein, the atmosphere that we create, and the ways that we communicate to each other and to God within our own Jewish homes. This is the epicenter of our relationship with God. And Rabbi Sachs, like we said, asks, why does Shemos end off with this topic when it seems a little anticlimactic coming right after Matan Torah? And there's a lot of parallels, as we know, as we've mentioned, that between Matan Torah and the wedding of Bnei Yisrael and God. So if Matan Torah is the wedding between Bnei Yisrael and God, it goes to follow that setting up the Mishkan is setting up the Jewish home. And it seems at first glance to many that the wedding is really the pinnacle of the relationship. This is the climax. But to those who have been married, and especially the longer you've been married, we know clearly that the wedding is almost a blip on the radar. It's just the starting point. It is nowhere near the climax. And in fact, it's once you leave the wedding and you're setting up your Bayis Naman B'Yisrael, that's where the work happens. That's where the daily, sometimes mundane, sometimes messy, sometimes the sacrifices, but that is where you foster and you nurture your relationship, of course, with your spouse and your family, but also with Hashem. And this is something we're capable of every day in our homes. And we should all use our bodies and our services and our homes to serve God and connect with each other. Good Shabbos.